The federal courthouse in downtown Boston fell silent as Judge Richard Blackwood entered his black robes, billowing behind him like storm clouds. At the defendant's table, former Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morgan sat in her wheelchair, spine straight as a flagpole, despite the titanium rods holding it together. Her attorney, Daniel Hayes, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before taking his seat. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Blackwood," the bailiff announced, though Sarah, of course, remained seated. Blackwood's gaze swept the courtroom before landing on Sarah, his lip curling almost imperceptibly. "Be seated," he said, voice like gravel. As he shuffled his papers, he peered over his reading glasses. "I see we have a benefits dispute case, VA denial appeal. Miss Morgan versus the Department of Veterans Affairs." "Lieutenant Commander Morgan, Your Honor," Daniel corrected respectfully. Blackwood looked up sharply. "Former Lieutenant Commander Counselor. We needn't stand on ceremony for inactive personnel." He turned a page. "Especially when said personnel are requesting additional accommodations from overtaxed government resources." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. A few veterans in attendance exchanged glances. "For the record, Your Honor," Daniel began, "this case concerns benefits legally owed to my client under Federal Statute 38 U.S.C. 11710, which specifically addresses specialized prosthetics for combat injured veterans." "Yes, yes," Blackwood waved dismissively. "I've reviewed the filing, rather thin on substantiating evidence. Wouldn't you say? Let's proceed." As the preliminary motions began, Blackwood's behavior grew increasingly hostile. He interrupted Daniel, constantly dismissed evidence with barely a glance, and addressed questions to Sarah with thinly veiled contempt. "Miss Morgan," he said deliberately, dropping her rank again, "perhaps you could enlighten the court as to why your special operations experience entitles you to special treatment now." Sarah's face remained impassive, but her hands, once steady enough to hit targets at 900 meters in variable wind conditions, clenched slightly on the arms of her wheelchair. She made a brief note in a small notebook on her lap. "Your Honor," Daniel objected, "Lieutenant Commander Morgan's service record speaks for itself. The classified nature of her operations prevents detailed disclosure, but the documentation provided clearly establishes her eligibility." "Ah, yes, classified. How convenient," Blackwood interrupted with a theatrical sigh. "The court is expected to simply take her word, I suppose." He leaned forward. "I've seen many veterans in my courtroom, Counselor. Real heroes don't typically spend their time pursuing litigation for personal gain." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sarah's eyes never left Blackwood's face, studying him with the same calm intensity she once used behind a rifle scope. Something flickered in her expression, not anger but recognition. She made another note. The morning proceeded with Blackwood continuing his unusual treatment of what should have been a straightforward case. Each time Daniel attempted to present evidence of Sarah's service record, Blackwood found reasons to question its relevance or authenticity. "These commendations," Blackwood said, holding up a document with distaste, "are from operations so secretive we cannot verify they occurred. Am I understanding correctly?" "The operations themselves remain classified, Your Honor," Daniel explained with thinning patience. "But the commendations are official Navy documents, signed by Admiral Isabella Hawthorne herself." "Hawthorne," Blackwood muttered, something unreadable passing across his features. Another desk admiral, handing out medals like party favors, no doubt. In the gallery, an older man in a veteran's cap stood up abruptly, then sat back down when his wife tugged at his sleeve. The disrespect being shown was unprecedented, even for Blackwood, who had a reputation for being tough on military cases. Sarah's composure never wavered. She sat with perfect posture, her gaze steady, occasionally writing in her notebook. When directly addressed, she answered in clear, precise language that spoke of her extensive training and education, despite Blackwood's attempts to provoke her. During a brief recess, Daniel leaned close to Sarah in a corner of the courtroom where they wouldn't be overheard. "This is beyond irregular," he whispered. "His behavior alone gives us grounds for a mistrial." Sarah shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's trying to break you down in front of everyone," Daniel said urgently. "This feels personal, Sarah." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It is personal, though he doesn't know how much." She glanced toward the judge's chambers. "We need to let this play out." "Are you sure about this strategy?" "It's risky." Sarah's gaze hardened. Risk assessment is my specialty, counselor. Trust the mission. When court reconvened, Blackwood seemed even more determined to undermine Sarah's dignity. I thought snipers were supposed to have excellent communication skills. He mocked, drawing uncomfortable laughter from some corners of the gallery. For the first time, a flicker of something dangerous crossed Sarah's face. She adjusted her wheelchair, positioning herself to face Blackwood directly. "Your Honor, may I retrieve something from my bag?" she asked. Blackwood gestured magnanimously. "By all means, Miss Morgan. Perhaps you have actual evidence hidden away." Sarah reached into her bag and produced a small voice recorder, which she placed on the table in front of her. Blackwood stiffened. "What is that device?" "A standard voice recorder, Your Honor," Sarah replied evenly. "Permitted under Courthouse Regulation 17.3, which allows assisted devices for disabled participants in legal proceedings." From which city in America are you watching this video today? Naval Special Warfare Training Center, Coronado, California, 1995. The morning air carried the taste of salt and possibility as 23-year-old Sarah Morgan stood with 39 men at the edge of the Pacific. Tall and athletic, with short brown hair that framed determined hazel eyes, she was one of only 3 women ever selected for SEAL training under the newly established pilot program. "The ocean doesn't care what's between your legs," bellowed Senior Chief Instructor Miller. "It only cares if you quit." His weathered face surveyed the recruits. "80% of you will ring that bell," he said, pointing to the brass bell hanging near the barracks. "Maybe more since we've got ladies present." Several men chuckled. Sarah's expression didn't change. "You think that's funny, Candidate Fisher?" Miller was suddenly inches from a smirking recruit's face. "Maybe you'd like to demonstrate proper form for the ladies." He turned to Sarah and the other women. "Would that be helpful, Morgan?" "No, Senior Chief," she replied, voice clear and steady. "I've studied the manual thoroughly. Standard combat swim stroke, entry angle 30 degrees, arm recovery at 45 kick depth, 18 inches. Miller's face remained stern, but something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Into the surf, all of you." The following weeks tested every limit of human endurance. Sarah endured the same brutal conditions as her male counterparts, the hypothermia-inducing cold water, the endless running on sand-filled boots, the sleep deprivation. Where she lacked in upper body strength, she compensated with technique and sheer determination. During Hell Week, when candidates went 5.5 days with virtually no sleep, Sarah watched as 20 men rang the bell, surrendering to exhaustion. She remained despite hallucinations from fatigue, despite muscles that screamed with every movement. On the 4th night, rain pounding down, she carried a rubber boat alongside 7 remaining men. Fisher, who had mocked her on day 1, stumbled. "Leave him," gasped another candidate. "We're falling behind." Sarah dropped to one knee beside Fisher. "On your feet, sailor," she said, her voice somehow firm despite her exhaustion. "We finish together or not at all." Fisher looked at her through rain-blurred eyes. "Why help me? I've been an ass." "Because that's what teammates do," Sarah replied, simply helping him up. They completed the evolution together, the last team to finish, but finish they did. Fisher never questioned her presence again. Of the 40 who began, only 9 completed Bud's training. Sarah was one of them, the first woman ever to do so. At graduation, standing in her dress whites, she found her father waiting, pride shining in his eyes. Colonel James Morgan, a decorated former SEAL who had served with distinction during Desert Storm, embraced his daughter. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said, voice thick with emotion. Sarah touched the small photo of her mother she kept in her pocket. Catherine Morgan had died of cancer when Sarah was 16, but her spirit had guided Sarah through the darkest moments of training. "She always said I was too stubborn for my own good." Sarah smiled. Her father's expression grew serious. "Listen to me, Sarah. What you've accomplished here is historic, but it's just the beginning. There are those who will never accept you no matter what you achieve. Remember why you're doing this. For country, for team, for self, in that order," she recited. "This country deserves our best service." He nodded. "Never forget that." Later that evening, her father presented her with his own sniper rifle, a meticulously maintained M40A1, the same model he had carried in Desert Storm. "A Morgan family tradition now," he said as she ran her fingers reverently over the precision instrument. "I've made some modifications. The trigger pull is adjusted to 3.5 pounds, perfect for your technique. Macmillan A2 stock for better stability. The Schmidt and Bender scope gives you 3 to 5x magnification clearest glass on the market. Sarah lifted the rifle, feeling its perfect balance. Through the scope, she could see targets on the distant range with crystal clarity. "It's perfect, Dad. You've earned it," he said. "Now go make history." And she did. Over the next decade, Sarah Morgan became one of the most lethal snipers in naval history. Her patience, precision, and unmatched ability to calculate complex ballistic equations in her head made her a legend in special operations circles. She operated in shadows, her missions classified at the highest levels, her achievements known only to those with proper clearance. By 29, at the age of 42, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morgan had risen to lead her own elite team, Delta 6. The safe house in northern Afghanistan hummed with focused energy as Delta 6 prepared for their upcoming operation. Located in a nondescript compound on the outskirts of a small village, the building's modest exterior concealed a state-of-the-art tactical operations center. Sarah Morgan studied the satellite imagery spread across the planning table, her experienced eyes catching details others might miss. Around her, the 4 other members of Delta 6 were engaged in their pre-mission rituals, which essential to the tight-knit unit that had become more family than team. Matter Chief Marcus Wilson, 47. The team's explosives expert methodically inspected his equipment with hands that betrayed no tremor, despite their weathered appearance. The oldest member of the team, Marcus, had served in Desert Storm alongside Sarah's father, a connection that had initially helped bridge the gap when she first took command. His salt and pepper beard, permitted due to the covert nature of their missions, framed a face etched with experience. "Detonators all check out," he reported without looking up. "Primary and secondary charges ready, using the new PETN-based compound stable up to 170 degrees minimal thermal signature." Across the room, Lieutenant Elijah Jones, 35, cleaned his weapons with precision born of thousands of repetitions. As the team's scout and reconnaissance specialist, the former Army Ranger had initially been skeptical of serving under a female commander. That skepticism had evaporated during their first mission together when Sarah's impossible shot had saved his life. "Still writing to that college boy of yours?" Chief Petty Officer Rachel Martinez teased him, not looking up from the communications equipment she was calibrating. Elijah smiled, the expression softening his otherwise intense features. "Tyler's made Dean's List 3 semesters running. Kid's smarter than I ever was." "Not hard," Rachel shot back with a grin. At 39, Rachel served as the team's communications and language specialist, fluent in 7 languages and able to mimic regional dialects with uncanny accuracy. Pictures of her 2 children, aged 7 and 9, were carefully taped inside her gear case, a reminder of what waited at home. In the corner, Petty Officer First Class Jason Campbell, 32, the team's medical specialist, conducted a final inventory of his med kit. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking supplies that had saved each of their lives at various points over the 3 years they'd served together. "Extra hemostatic gauze this time," he noted. "After what happened in Kandahar, I'm not taking chances." Sarah nodded, remembering their narrow escape 6 months prior. "Good call." Jason's engagement ring caught the light as he closed his kit. "Emily's already booked the venue for September," he said, a rare smile crossing his usually stoic face. "She says you're all invited, classified identities or not." "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied, "though I'm not sure Delta 6 clean up well enough for a formal wedding." The easy laughter that followed spoke volumes about their bond, forged through shared danger, mutual respect, and absolute trust in each other's capabilities. Despite their different backgrounds, ages, and specialties, they moved with the synchronized precision of a single organism. Later that evening, they shared a meal together, a pre-mission tradition. Rachel had somehow procured the ingredients for her grandmother's enchiladas, a dish that had become their unofficial good luck charm. To Delta 6, Marcus raised his water glass in a toast. "The most dysfunctional family the Navy ever assembled." To family, the others echoed the word, carrying weight beyond its syllables. As they ate, conversation drifted to life, beyond the mission, Rachel's daughter's upcoming dance recital, Elijah's son's college applications, Jason's wedding plans. Sarah mostly listened, contributing occasionally, but taking comfort in the normalcy of the moment, a brief respite from the dangers that awaited them. After dinner, Jason approached her privately, removing something from his pocket. "Commander, I know it's not standard procedure, but..." He held out a small velvet box. "If anything happens to me tomorrow, Would you make sure Emily gets this? It's her grandmother's ring, family heirloom. She wanted me to wear it until the wedding. Sarah took the point, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Nothing's going to happen to you, Jason. But yes, I'll make sure she gets it. He nodded, relief evident in his eyes. Thank you, ma'am. As the team turned in for a few hours of rest before their 0300 departure, Sarah remained at the planning table reviewing the operation details one final time. Something about the intelligence didn't sit right with her. The information was too specific, too convenient. She made a note to discuss her concerns with Admiral Hawthorne after the mission. For now, her team needed her focused and confident. Delta 6 had never failed a mission under her command, and tomorrow would be no different. Or so she thought. 0200 hours. The briefing room at Bagram Air Base thrummed with the quiet energy of final preparations. Admiral Isabella Hawthorne, 62, stood at the head of the table, her silver hair cut in a practical bob that framed sharp blue eyes accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. Delta 6, she nodded to Sarah and her team. The intel on this operation comes directly from JSOC. High confidence, multiple source verification. Sarah studied the mission brief displayed on the screen, a high-value target located in a compound near the Pakistani border. Intelligence suggested he would be present for only a 48-hour window. Ma'am, Sarah said, the intel seems unusually specific. Do we know the source? Admiral Hawthorne's expression remained neutral. Classified even at your clearance level, Commander. But I can tell you it's been vetted through Meridian Defense Systems' new Poseidon Analytics program. Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus. Meridian was a relatively new defense contractor that had rapidly gained influence in intelligence circles. With respect, Admiral, Sarah continued, the specificity concerns me. The exact room, the exact time frame, it almost feels like someone wants us to succeed, Commander, Hawthorne interrupted. Sometimes we get lucky. The mission is a go. The team geared up in silence, each member focused on their role. Sarah checked her rifle, her father's M40A1 modified with a suppressor and custom scope, then stowed it carefully in its case. As team leader, she carried a standard-issue Sig Sauer P226 sidearm as well, though she hoped not to need it. Their mission was surgical precision, not brute force. The UH-60 Blackhawk dropped them 5 kilometers from the target under the cover of darkness. They moved through the rugged terrain with practiced efficiency, communicating through hand signals and occasional whispers over their secure comms. By 0430, they had eyes on the compound, a sprawling structure nestled against a rocky hillside. Rachel confirmed communications while Elijah set up observation points. Jason prepared his medical equipment, and Marcus placed strategic charges that would serve as their diversion if needed. Sarah took position on a rocky outcropping that offered a clear line of sight to the target building. Through her scope, she could see guards patrolling the perimeter exactly as the intelligence had indicated. 6 positions rotating every 30 minutes, she murmured into her comm. Just like the brief said. Too perfect, Marcus replied softly from his position. I don't like it. Stay frosty, Sarah cautioned. Eagle 6, this is Delta 6. We have eyes on target proceeding as planned. The acknowledgement from base came through Rachel's comms. Delta 6, you are cleared to engage as planned. Extraction on your signal. For 3 hours, they watched and waited as the compound came to life with the rising sun. Then at precisely 0730, their target appeared in the exact window indicated in the intelligence brief. Sarah lined up her shot, accounting for distance, wind, and the morning thermals. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, her breathing slow and controlled. Target acquired, she whispered. Take the shot, Marcus confirmed. Sarah exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the sound suppressed to little more than a cough. Through her scope, she watched the target drop. Confirmed hit, she reported. Target down. What happened next would replay in her nightmares for years to come. Instead of the expected confusion, the compound erupted in coordinated activity. Guards moved with purpose, not panic, converging on positions that corresponded exactly with Delta 6's hiding spots. We're blown, Elijah's voice crackled over the comm. They knew we were. His transmission cut off with a burst of gunfire. Ambush, Sarah shouted. Fall back to extraction point. Bravo, move. She collapsed her rifle setup with practiced speed, securing it to her back as she began to move. Below, she could see Marcus detonating his charges, creating a diversion, but it was clear the enemy had anticipated this tactic. Rachel's status, Sarah called into her comm as she navigated the rocky terrain. Taking fire, came the breathless reply. East Ridge can't. The transmission dissolved into static. Sarah changed direction, heading toward Rachel's last known position. As she crested a small ridge, the first bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. The second hit her lower back, and she felt a sickening crunch as the round impacted her spine. She fell hard, the world tilting sideways. Through waves of pain, she managed to drag herself behind a boulder, drawing her sidearm with her uninjured arm. Delta 6 to Eagle 6, she gasped into her comm. Ambush! Need immediate extraction. Team scattered? The reply was garbled, lost in bursts of static and gunfire. Through sheer force of will, Sarah pushed herself up enough to peer over the boulder. What she saw froze her blood. Marcus pinned down behind minimal cover, fighting off attackers from multiple angles. As she watched, he took a hit to the leg, then another to the chest. Marcus! She screamed, firing her sidearm at the closest attackers. His eyes found hers across the distance. With a grimace of pain, he reached for something at his belt, a detonator. He gave her one final nod, then pressed the button. The explosion rocked the hillside, taking out a cluster of enemy fighters, but Marcus with them. Sarah's vision blurred with tears and pain. She tried to move, but found her legs unresponsive. The realization hit her with more force than the bullets. Her spine was damaged. Through the haze of agony, she heard movement behind her. Raising her weapon with a trembling hand, she turned to face the threat. Jason appeared, his medical kit open, face streaked with blood from a gash across his forehead. Commander, he gasped, immediately assessing her wounds. Don't move. The others, she managed to ask as he applied pressure to her shoulder wound. His expression told her everything. Elijah's gone. Rachel's hit bad. I stabilized her, but she needs evac now. He worked quickly, administering morphine that dulled the edges of her pain. Extraction team is 3 minutes out, he said, glancing at his watch. We just need to hold. The shot that hit him came from nowhere, a clean strike to the center of his chest. Jason looked down at the spreading crimson stain with an expression of surprise. Emily, he whispered before collapsing beside Sarah. No, Sarah screamed, firing her remaining rounds in the direction of the shooter. Using her arms, she dragged herself to Jason, desperately searching for a pulse that wasn't there. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors penetrated her consciousness. The extraction team was coming, but they were too late. Too late for Marcus, for Elijah, for Jason. Maybe too late for Rachel. As darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, Sarah's hand closed around Jason's engagement ring, still in its box in her pocket. Her last conscious thought was a promise to her team, to herself. I will find who did this to you. I swear it. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland. The antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting had become Sarah Morgan's entire world. 6 months after the ambush, she stared out the window of her hospital room, watching rain trace patterns down the glass. The medical report on her bedside table laid out her new reality in clinical terms: T12 spinal cord injury. Shrapnel damage to right shoulder with 70% mobility restored. Traumatic brain injury, mild to moderate. Prognosis: permanent damage to lower extremities requiring bilateral transtibial amputation. Potential for limited mobility using advanced prosthetics following intensive rehabilitation. Sarah knew the medical terminology couldn't capture the full impact of what had happened. Both legs amputated below the knee. Her sniper's career over. Her team, her family decimated. Her father's photograph sat beside the report, Colonel James Morgan, in his dress uniform, smiling proudly. He had died of a heart attack 2 years before the ambush, spared from seeing his daughter like this. Sarah wasn't sure if that was mercy or another cruelty of fate. The door opened and Dr. Patel entered, followed by a tall man in his late 50s, wearing a crisp suit that couldn't quite hide his military bearing. Commander Morgan, Dr. Patel said, you have a visitor. This is Daniel Hayes. Sarah interrupted, recognizing him immediately. JAG Corps retired. You served with my father in Desert Storm. Hayes smiled, crow's feet crinkling around keen gray eyes. Your father saved my life in Kafji. He spoke of you often. Dr. Patel excused herself, leaving them alone. Hayes took the seat beside Sarah's bed, studying her with an appraising gaze that held neither pity nor discomfort, a refreshing change from most visitors. I heard about what happened to Delta 6, he said without preamble. The official story doesn't add up. Sarah's attention sharpened. For months, she had been told the ambush was the result of an intelligence failure, tragic but not uncommon in their line of work. What do you mean? Hayes leaned forward. I've been practicing military law for 30 years. I know when a cover-up is happening. Your team was set up, Sarah. The question is by whom and why. How would you know that? She asked, suspicion edging her voice. Because I represented a Meridian defense analyst 6 months ago, a whistleblower who claimed their Poseidon program was compromised. 3 days after he came to me, he was found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide. Hayes's expression made clear what he thought of that conclusion. Meridian provided the intelligence for our mission, Sarah said, mind racing. Admiral Hawthorne specifically mentioned their Poseidon program. Hayes nodded. And 2 weeks after your team was ambushed, a federal judge sealed all records related to Meridian's government contracts in the name of national security. Which judge? Richard Blackwood, U.S. District Court, Boston Division. Sarah absorbed this information, pieces beginning to connect in her mind. Why are you telling me this? Because James Morgan's daughter deserves to know the truth, Hayes replied. And because I need a client with standing to challenge the VA's systematic denial of benefits to special operators injured during classified missions. Sarah's laugh held no humor. You want me to be your test case? I can barely sit up without assistance. What I want at a being, Hayes said carefully, is to give you a purpose while you heal, and maybe, just maybe, a path to finding answers about what happened to your team. Sarah looked down at the bandages covering her amputated legs, then at her father's photograph. After months of surgeries, pain, and the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, the possibility of action of purpose felt like oxygen to a drowning woman. What would this involve? Filing a benefits appeal case that would likely come before Judge Blackwood, Hayes explained, giving us legitimate access to investigate him and his connections to Meridian. You think a federal judge was involved in what happened to my team? I think money and power create strange bedfellows, Hayes replied, and I think Blackwood's rulings have benefited Meridian in ways that defy coincidence. Sarah was silent for a long moment, weighing the implications. Finally, she asked, have you spoken to Rachel Martinez? She survived too. Hayes's expression darkened. Chief Martinez has been transferred to a long-term care facility in San Diego. Her traumatic brain injury was significant. She's unable to communicate or recognize visitors. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Rachel. Brilliant, quick-witted Rachel reduced to such a state. She thought of Rachel's children, now essentially orphaned. What about the families? Elijah's son, Jason's fiancée? They've been told the official story, Hayes said gently, that their loved ones died heroically serving their country. Sarah's hand went to her pocket where she still kept Jason's engagement ring. She had been unable to fulfill her promise to deliver it to Emily. The military had handled all personal effects while Sarah was fighting for her life. When I was in the field, she said slowly, my job was to remove threats from a distance. Clean, precise, one shot. This would be different. Messier, Hayes agreed. Longer, but potentially just as effective. Sarah looked out at the rain, thinking of her team. Marcus, who had sacrificed himself to save her. Elijah, who would never see his son graduate college. Jason, who would never marry his Emily. Rachel, trapped in a damaged mind. My rehabilitation will take months, she said. Longer to learn to function with prosthetics. I'm a patient man, Hayes replied, and this gives us time to build our case properly. A moment of hesitation crossed his face. Sarah, you should know this path won't be easy. We'll be going up against powerful people who've already shown they're willing to kill to protect their interests. Sarah's eyes met his determination, hardening into resolve. They took everything from me, Daniel. My team, my career. She gestured toward her amputated legs. They even took my ability to stand on my own 2 feet, but they didn't take my mind or my will. She held his gaze steadily. I'm a sniper. I'm patient, and I never miss my target. Hayes nodded, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then let's begin. Sarah Morgan's apartment in Arlington, Virginia had been modified to accommodate her wheelchair. Wider doorways, lower countertops, a roll-in shower. But the spare bedroom had been converted into something else entirely, an investigation headquarters. Corkboards lined the walls covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting related elements. A secure computer system, courtesy of some of Sarah's former intelligence contacts, occupied one corner, while filing cabinets containing meticulously organized evidence filled another. Sarah, now adept at maneuvering her wheelchair, studied a newly acquired photograph. Judge Richard Blackwood shaking hands with Victor Chen, CEO of Meridian Defense Systems, at a fundraising gala in Washington, D.C. This places them together socially, she noted as Daniel Hayes entered with coffee for both of them. But it's hardly smoking gun evidence. No, Hayes agreed, setting her cup within easy reach. But combined with these, he placed a folder on her lap. It starts to look more interesting. Sarah opened the folder to find financial records. Blackstone Consulting Group, owned by Roland Blackstone, who happens to be married to Judge Blackwood's sister. 3 days after Blackwood sealed the records on Meridian's government contracts, Blackstone Consulting received a wire transfer of $750,000 from a shell company that we've now traced back to Meridian. Sarah's eyes narrowed. For what services? Officially strategic consulting, unofficially. Hayes shrugged. That's what we need to find out. Over the past year, their investigation had progressed slowly but steadily. Hayes had filed the VA benefits appeal as planned, carefully maneuvering it toward Blackwood's jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Sarah had used her extensive contacts in the intelligence community to gather information on Meridian Blackwood and the connections between them. The physical toll had been immense. Sarah's rehabilitation was a grueling process, learning to use prosthetic legs, rebuilding her upper body strength, managing chronic pain that sometimes left her gasping and sleepless. But the mental discipline that had made her an elite sniper now served her in recovery. Each small victory, the first time she stood on her prosthetic legs, the day she took 3 steps unassisted, fueled her determination. The emotional toll was harder to quantify. Nightmares plagued her sleep. Marcus's final nod before detonating the charges, Jason's surprised expression as the life drained from his eyes. During the darkest hours, Sarah would clutch Jason's engagement ring, still unwilling to part with this final connection to her team. Today, however, brought new purpose. Admiral Isabella Hawthorne was coming to visit, the first time Sarah had seen her since before the ambush. "Are you sure about this approach?" Hayes asked, noting Sarah's tension as she adjusted her position in the wheelchair. Although Sarah could now walk short distances with her prosthetics, she often used the wheelchair for tactical reasons. People tended to underestimate someone they perceived as disabled. "Hawthorne was my commanding officer for 7 years," Sarah replied. "If she's involved in what happened to my team, I'll know. If she's not, we need her help." The doorbell rang precisely at 1400 hours, military punctuality. Hayes answered while Sarah positioned her wheelchair in the living room, deliberately choosing not to use her prosthetics for this meeting. Admiral Hawthorne entered her uniform, immaculate as always. At 64, she remained imposing, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp and assessing as it took in Sarah's apartment, lingering momentarily on the closed door to the investigation room. "Commander Morgan," she said formally. "Admiral," Sarah replied with equal formality. "Thank you for coming." Hawthorne sat in the offered chair, declining coffee. The initial conversation remained superficial, inquiries about Sarah's health, updates on mutual acquaintances, careful avoidance of Delta 6. Hayes remained silent, observing the dance between the two women, until Sarah finally steered the conversation toward their purpose. "Admiral, I've been investigating what happened to my team." Hawthorne's expression didn't change. "The official report is a lie," Sarah interrupted, "and I think you know that." A heavy silence filled the room. Hawthorne's gaze flicked to Hayes, then back to Sarah. "These are serious allegations, Commander." "They are," Sarah agreed, "which is why I need to know where you stand. Were you involved in setting up my team?" The question hung in the air between them, raw and dangerous. Hawthorne's face remained unreadable for a long moment. Then almost imperceptibly, her shoulders sagged. "No," she said quietly, "but I failed to protect you. The intelligence, I should have questioned it more thoroughly. I've carried that guilt for over a year now." Sarah studied her former commander, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, she continued, "We believe Meridian Defense Systems compromised the Poseidon intelligence, and that Judge Richard Blackwood helped cover it up." Hawthorne's eyebrows rose slightly. "Blackwood, the federal judge." "The same," Hayes confirmed, speaking for the first time. "We've found financial connections between Blackwood's brother-in-law and Meridian, timing that coincides with the sealing of records related to Poseidon." "What are you planning?" Hawthorne asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer wouldn't please her. Sarah exchanged a glance with Hayes before explaining their strategy, the benefits appeal case as a means to investigate Blackwood, the gathering of evidence to expose both the judge and Meridian. When she finished, Hawthorne was silent for a long moment. "You're proposing to use yourself as bait," she finally said, "to draw Blackwood out." "Yes. It's dangerous. If they were willing to sacrifice a special operations team, they won't hesitate to eliminate one disabled former commander." Sarah's jaw tightened at the word disabled. "With respect, Admiral, I'm counting on them to underestimate me because of this wheelchair." Hawthorne studied her former subordinate with new appreciation. "You always were a strategic thinker, Morgan." She stood, decision apparently made. "I need to make some calls. If what you're suggesting is true, this goes beyond a corrupt judge and defense contractor. This is about national security. We need to keep this circle small," Hayes cautioned, "until we know how far the corruption extends." "Agreed," Hawthorne nodded. "I know someone at Justice who can be trusted, Carmen Rodriguez, Assistant Attorney General, former Naval Intelligence. She'll want evidence, not just theories." "We're working on that," Sarah assured her. As Hawthorne prepared to leave, she paused, looking down at Sarah with an expression that mingled respect and regret. "Your team deserved better, Commander. We all failed them." "Not all of us," Sarah replied. "Some of us were just pieces on the board. I intend to find the players." After the Admiral departed, Hayes turned to Sarah. "She's with us." "I believe so." Sarah nodded. "But we proceed with caution. Trust but verify." Hayes smiled grimly, as always. "Now let's prepare for Phase 2. Blackwood's annual fundraising gala is next month, perfect opportunity for reconnaissance." Sarah glanced down at her wheelchair. "You think they'll let me in?" "Oh, they'll let you in," Hayes assured her. "A decorated disabled veteran. You're exactly the kind of photo opportunity these events crave. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When this is over, when we've exposed them all, you'll consider what comes next." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "I see how you look at that rifle of your father's," Hayes explained. "Like you're just biding your time until you can return to the only life you know. But there might be something else waiting for you beyond vengeance." Sarah didn't answer immediately, the possibility of a future beyond her mission still too abstract to contemplate. Finally, she said, "One battle at a time, counselor. Let's win this one first." Hayes nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Fair enough. Then let's make sure it's a night Judge Blackwood never forgets." Sarah Morgan stared at her reflection in the mirror of her Arlington apartment bathroom. The woman looking back at her had changed in ways beyond the physical. Her once military short hair had grown out to shoulder length, framing a face that had grown leaner, sharper. The eyes that had once tracked targets through a sniper scope now held a different kind of intensity, the focus of someone with a singular purpose. She gripped the edges of the sink, steadying herself as she removed her prosthetic legs for the evening. Even after months of practice, the process remained awkward. The high-tech carbon fiber limbs represented the best military medical technology available. Ironically, the same advanced prosthetics the VA had initially denied her, claiming her injuries didn't meet the threshold for specialized care. Her case against them, now her cover for investigating Blackwood, had begun as a genuine grievance. As she lowered herself into her wheelchair, Sarah felt the familiar phantom pain where her legs had been. The doctors had explained it as her brain still sending signals to limbs no longer there. She closed her eyes, employing the same breathing techniques she had once used to steady her trigger finger during a difficult shot. When the pain subsided, she wheeled herself into the living room where Daniel Hayes was reviewing surveillance photographs from the Judicial Excellence fundraiser they had attended the previous week. Their plan to observe Blackwood had yielded more than expected. Not only had they confirmed his close relationship with Victor Chen of Meridian Defense, but they had identified a mysterious third figure who appeared in several photographs. "Got an ID on our mystery man," Hayes announced as Sarah joined him. "Dmitry Volkov, former KGB officer, now operates as a private consultant for various interests." "Russian intelligence," Sarah noted, examining the photographs more closely. "What's a federal judge doing, meeting with a former KGB officer?" "That's what we need to find out," Hayes replied, spreading several more photographs on the table. "Our source managed to follow them after the gala. They met again the next morning at a cafe, then proceeded to Meridian's DC office." Sarah studied the images, noting the body language between Blackwood and Volkov, both men leaning forward, conversation intense but comfortable. They know each other well, she observed. This isn't their first meeting. No, Hayes agreed. And look at this. He pointed to one photograph showing Blackwood discreetly passing what appeared to be a flash drive to Volkov. Whatever information is being exchanged, it's worth protecting. Sarah's mind raced with implications. A federal judge meeting with a former Russian intelligence officer and the CEO of a defense contractor that provides classified intelligence to U.S. Special Operations teams. The question is, what information is being sold and to whom? Hayes mused. Sarah picked up another photo, this one showing Blackwood entering his car after the meeting. Whatever it is, it's worth killing for. My team wasn't collateral damage, Daniel. We were targets. Later that evening, as Hayes departed, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts. She moved to a shelf where she kept her father's M40A1 rifle. Though she had no plans to use it, maintaining the weapon had become a daily ritual, a connection to her past life and to her father's memory. As she methodically cleaned the rifle, Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA played softly in the background, another connection to her father who had been a devoted fan. The album had been released in 1984 when Sarah was 12 and had become the soundtrack to countless road trips with her dad. It's not about blind flag waving, he'd told her once. It's about holding the country accountable to its ideals. Loving something means wanting it to be better. The memory brought both comfort and renewed purpose as her hands moved over the familiar contours of the rifle. The physical therapist had actually encouraged activities like this, tasks requiring fine motor skills that helped rebuild neural pathways damaged by her injuries. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hayes. Meeting with Admiral H. and AAG Rodriguez tomorrow, 1400 hours, Hawthorne residence. Sarah acknowledged the message, then returned to her ritual. Tomorrow would be a crucial step, bringing Assistant Attorney General Carmen Rodriguez into their confidence. If they were right about the scope of Blackwood's activities, they would need Justice Department resources to build a case that would stand up in court. The next day, Sarah arrived at Admiral Hawthorne's Alexandria townhouse precisely at 1400 hours, having taken meticulous precautions to ensure she wasn't followed. She had chosen to use her wheelchair today, both for the practical advantage of conserving energy and for the strategic benefit of continuing to appear more vulnerable than she actually was. Admiral Hawthorne greeted her with military formality that didn't quite mask her concern. Commander Morgan, how are you progressing? Physical therapy is going well, Sarah replied, knowing the Admiral's question encompassed far more than her medical condition. I'm up to 2 hours on the prosthetics now. Hawthorne nodded in approval as she led Sarah into her study, where Hayes and a distinguished Latina woman in her mid-50s waited. The woman rose as they entered, her posture and bearing immediately identifying her as military-trained, despite her civilian attire. Commander Morgan, this is Assistant Attorney General Carmen Rodriguez. Hawthorne made the introduction. Rodriguez extended her hand, her grip firm and assessing. Commander, your reputation precedes you. As does yours, ma'am, Sarah replied. Naval Intelligence, Persian Gulf, 1991, before transferring to JAG Corps. Distinguished Service Medal for operations that remain classified. Rodriguez's eyebrow raised slightly. You've done your homework. Trust requires verification in our line of work, Sarah said simply. Indeed it does. Rodriguez agreed, gesturing for Sarah to join them at the table where documents were already spread out. Which is why I've spent the past 3 weeks verifying everything Admiral Hawthorne and Mr. Hayes have told me about your investigation. Sarah exchanged a glance with Hayes, noting his slight nod. So they had already briefed Rodriguez and given her time to validate their claims, a prudent approach. And your conclusions, Sarah asked directly. Rodriguez's expression remained professionally neutral. That there's sufficient evidence to warrant further investigation into Judge Blackwood's connections with Meridian Defense. However, she paused, linking these connections to what happened to your team in Afghanistan requires more concrete evidence than you currently possess. That's why we needed to meet, Hayes interjected. We've discovered something new. He opened his briefcase and produced a folder containing the Singapore surveillance photos, along with financial records. Judge Blackwood met with Dmitry Volkov in Singapore last month. 3 days after this meeting, a shell company linked to Volkov transferred $2 million to another shell company that we've connected to Blackstone Consulting. Rodriguez examined the evidence with practiced efficiency. Interesting, but still circumstantial. What's the connection to Delta 6? Sarah leaned forward. Volkov specializes in selling military intelligence. Blackwood had access to classified information through cases involving Meridian. We believe he's been selling operational details, including the mission parameters for Delta 6's final operation. To whom? Rodriguez asked sharply. That's what we still need to determine, Hayes admitted. But given Volkov's client list, the possibilities are concerning. Admiral Hawthorne, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. The implications extend beyond one special operations team, Carmen. If a federal judge is selling classified intelligence to foreign interests, it's a matter of national security. Rodriguez finished the thought her decision apparently made. I can initiate a covert Justice Department investigation, but it will take time to build a case strong enough to move against a sitting federal judge. Time we may not have, Sarah countered. Blackwood is being considered for elevation to the appeals court. His confirmation hearing is in 6 months. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. Then we need to accelerate our timeline. What's your next move, Commander? The VA benefits appeal hearing is scheduled for next month, Sarah explained. Blackwood will be presiding as we arranged. It gives us a legitimate opportunity to observe him up close, potentially provoke a reaction. It also puts you directly in his sights, Rodriguez noted. If he is involved in what happened to your team and he recognizes you as a threat, he'll see a disabled veteran fighting bureaucracy, Sarah replied, her voice hardening. Not the hunter she actually is. As the meeting continued, they developed a coordinated strategy. Rodriguez would initiate a quiet Justice Department investigation focusing on Blackwood's financial ties and foreign connections. Admiral Hawthorne would use her influence to monitor any unusual activity within naval intelligence circles. Hayes and Sarah would proceed with the benefits appeal case, using it as cover to gather more evidence on Blackwood's connections to Meridian. Their planning session lasted over 3 hours, with Rodriguez proving herself both thorough and cautious, qualities Sarah appreciated. They agreed on secure communication protocols and contingency plans should their investigation be discovered. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside. Commander, I admire what you're doing, but I've seen vendettas consume good people before. This isn't about vengeance, Sarah insisted. It's about justice. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. Sometimes the line between the two blurs. Just be careful which side you're standing on when this is over. Sarah considered this warning, and Hayes drove her home, the sunset painting the Washington Monument in golden light as they passed. Do you think she's right? She finally asked. Am I crossing a line here? Hayes took his time, answering, his eyes steady on the road. I think you're doing what needs to be done when the system fails. The line gets crossed when you stop caring about the truth and start caring only about making someone pay. He glanced at her. I don't see that in you, Sarah. I see someone who wants the right people to face the right consequences for the right reasons. Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. The objective remains the same, Daniel. Find the truth, protect the country, honor the fallen. Her hand went instinctively to Jason's engagement ring, still hanging on the chain around her neck. And make sure those responsible face consequences. Winter gave way to spring, and Sarah's investigation expanded methodically. Her apartment's spare room no longer sufficed to contain their growing case file, so Hayes had secured a small office in a nondescript building in Arlington, conveniently equipped with freighted elevator access for Sarah's wheelchair. Today, the office buzzed with focused energy as Sarah coordinated their growing network of sources. A large digital display showed a complex relationship map with Blackwood at the center, connected to various entities and individuals through color-coded lines representing different types of relationships: financial, personal, professional. Thomas Varga called Blackwood again this morning. Reported Lisa Chen, a former CIA analyst, who had joined their team 3 months ago. In her early 40s, Lisa had left the agency after becoming disillusioned with internal politics, but her skills in pattern analysis and electronic surveillance remained sharp. Same burner phone? Sarah asked, not looking up from the document she was reviewing. Yes, but this time we managed to triangulate his location downtown Boston, near the federal courthouse. The call lasted 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Sarah nodded, making a note. Thomas Varga had emerged as a person of interest 2 months ago, a Hungarian national with diplomatic credentials but no clear diplomatic role. Their surveillance had captured him meeting with Blackwood twice, both times in settings that suggested they were attempting to avoid detection. "What about Blackwood's clerk?" Hayes asked, entering the room with coffee for everyone. "Any progress there?" "Some," Sarah confirmed. "James Miller, former Army, served in Iraq, received a Purple Heart. His son was diagnosed with leukemia last year. Medical bills have him underwater financially despite his federal health insurance." "Vulnerable to financial inducement," Hayes noted. "Has Blackwood exploited that?" "Not directly," Sarah replied. "But Miller's bank records show a $50,000 deposit 3 months ago, source untraceable. Coincidentally, that's when his son was accepted into an experimental treatment program that typically has a 2-year waiting list." Lisa looked up from her computer. "That fits the pattern. Blackwood never dirties his own hands. He uses intermediaries like Blackstone or Varga." Sarah wheeled herself to the relationship map, studying it intently. "We need to flip someone in his inner circle. Someone who knows what he's doing, but might have moral qualms about it." "Miller could be our best option," Hayes suggested. "A fellow veteran with a sick child, you could establish a rapport." Sarah considered this. "I'll need a legitimate reason to approach him." "The pre-hearing conference for your VA appeal is next week," Hayes reminded her. "Miller will be there to manage Blackwood's calendar. It gives you an opening." The following week, Sarah navigated her wheelchair through the security checkpoint at the federal courthouse, her military ID earning her respectful nods from the guards. She had deliberately arrived an hour early for the pre-hearing conference, knowing that Judge Blackwood's schedule typically included a working lunch in his chambers before afternoon proceedings. As expected, James Miller was at his desk outside the judge's chambers, organizing files while eating a sandwich at his desk. He looked up as Sarah approached a man in his early 30s with a hyper-vigilant awareness common to combat veterans. His eyes registered her wheelchair, then the military bearing that even disability couldn't erase. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, setting down a sandwich. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morgan." She introduced herself. "I'm here for the 2 o'clock pre-hearing conference with Judge Blackwood. I know I'm early, but the accessible transportation schedule isn't exactly flexible." Recognition flickered in Miller's eyes. "The SEAL sniper. I read about your case." Sarah offered a modest smile. "Former SEAL, now just trying to navigate the VA system, which sometimes feels more dangerous than combat." Miller laughed, a genuine sound that suggested Sarah's approach was working. "I hear that. Army Infantry, 2007 to 2012, Fallujah and Mosul." "Well, thank you for your service," Sarah said sincerely. "Tough deployments." "Not as tough as what you went through," Miller replied, glancing at her wheelchair. "I followed the news when your team was ambushed. I'm sorry about your people." Sarah nodded, allowing genuine emotion to show in her expression. "Thank you. They were the best of the best." A moment of silent understanding passed between them, the unspoken brotherhood of those who had served. Sarah used the opening to build rapport about Miller's transition to civilian life, his work at the courthouse. When he mentioned his son in passing, she gently encouraged him to share more. 7 years old, fighting leukemia like a true warrior." Miller said, pride and fear mingling in his voice as he showed her a photo on his desk. "Tougher than his old man ever was." "He has your eyes," Sarah observed. "Determined." Miller's expression softened. "He got into this experimental treatment program at Mass General. It's been a miracle. 6 months ago, the doctors were talking hospice care. Now they're talking remission." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "Those programs are nearly impossible to get into from what I've heard." Something flickered across Miller's face. Discomfort, perhaps guilt. "We got lucky. Judge Blackwood has connections on the hospital board." Sarah filed this information away while keeping her expression neutral. "It's good to have people looking out for you." "Yeah," Miller agreed, though his enthusiasm seemed to dim slightly. "The judge has been supportive." Before Sarah could probe further, the elevator doors opened, and Judge Blackwood emerged, engaged in conversation with another man Sarah recognized from their surveillance, Victor Chen, CEO of Meridian Defense. Sarah watched Miller's reaction carefully. The slight stiffening of his posture, the way his eyes darted away from the two men, suggesting discomfort with their association. Interesting. Blackwood noticed her presence immediately, his expression darkening momentarily before he schooled his features into judicial impassivity. Commander Morgan, he acknowledged her, the courtesy of using her rank, a stark contrast to his dismissive behavior at their previous encounter. You're quite early for our conference. Accessible transportation has limited scheduling options, Your Honor, Sarah explained. I hope it's not an inconvenience. Not at all, Blackwood replied smoothly, turning to his companion. Mr. Chen, this is Lieutenant Commander Morgan, one of our decorated veterans seeking benefits assistance. Chen regarded Sarah with calculated interest. Commander, Meridian Defense values the service of our military personnel. We employ many veterans ourselves. How admirable, Sarah replied, watching both men carefully for reactions. Perhaps you could advise the VA on the value of taking care of those who serve. A tightness appeared around Blackwood's mouth. Mr. Miller will show you to the conference room, Commander. Mr. Chen and I have matters to discuss before your hearing. As Miller escorted her to the conference room, Sarah noted how his demeanor changed once they were out of Blackwood's presence. Subtle signs of relaxation, as if a weight had been temporarily lifted. You don't care for Chen, she observed quietly as they reached the empty conference room. Miller glanced around nervously before responding. Let's just say some of the judge's associates make me uncomfortable. Military instincts die hard. They keep us alive, Sarah replied meaningfully. She handed him her card, ostensibly her attorney's contact information, but with her personal number handwritten on the back. If those instincts ever tell you something's wrong, I'm a good listener. Miller stared at the card for a long moment before pocketing it. The judge will be with you shortly, he said professionally, but the look he gave her contained something more, recognition, perhaps of a potential ally. After he left, Sarah sent a text to Hayes. Seed planted with Miller. Connection established. Also confirmed Chen-Blackwood relationship continues. Proceeding as planned. When Hayes and Admiral Hawthorne arrived 30 minutes later for the pre-hearing conference, Sarah briefed them quietly on her interaction with Miller. He's uncomfortable with Blackwood's associates, she concluded, and grateful for his son's medical treatment in a way that suggests he knows it came at a price. Conscience is a powerful motivator, Hayes noted, especially for a parent wanting to set the right example. Admiral Hawthorne's expression remained concerned. Be careful. If Blackwood suspects you're turning his people, he'll act swiftly. I'm counting on his arrogance, Sarah replied. To him, I'm just a broken soldier fighting for benefits, not a threat to his operation. When Blackwood entered for the conference, his demeanor was all professional courtesy, but Sarah caught the calculating assessment in his gaze as he reviewed the details of her appeal. She played her role perfectly respectful, but persistent, a wounded warrior seeking justice without appearing to suspect anything beyond bureaucratic obstruction. By the end of the hour-long meeting, Sarah was confident she had maintained her cover while simultaneously advancing their investigation. Blackwood had no idea that his clerk had just been approached as a potential informant, or that every detail of his interaction with Chen was being analyzed by former intelligence officers. As they left the courthouse, Hayes assisted Sarah into his car, maintaining the appearance of a devoted friend helping a disabled veteran. Miller will contact us, Sarah predicted once they were safely driving away. Maybe not immediately, but soon. He's trapped in Blackwood's web, but looking for a way out. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. And what about Blackwood? Did you get any read on whether he suspects our real purpose? Sarah gazed out the window at the courthouse receding in the distance. He's cautious but confident in his power. He sees me as someone he can easily manage when the hearing comes a sympathetic but ultimately inconsequential figure. His mistake, Hayes said with grim satisfaction. Sarah noticed the way Hayes looked at her, not with pity or concern, but with genuine admiration. Over the months of working together, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. She found herself increasingly aware of these moments, the brief glances and casual touches that suggested something more than professional collaboration. Daniel, she said hesitantly, I've been meaning to ask you something. What's that? Why are you doing this? You had a comfortable retirement ahead of you. This investigation puts everything at risk, your reputation, your safety. Hayes was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When I was in Desert Storm with your father, our unit came under heavy fire. I was hit not badly, but enough to knock me down. The enemy was advancing and I couldn't move. Your father came back for me, carried me 3 kilometers through enemy territory to safety. He glanced at her. I never got the chance to repay that debt to him. Maybe this is my way of honoring it. Sarah nodded, understanding more than he said. He would have appreciated that, but I think there's more to it. A small smile touched Hayes's lips. Perhaps there is, but that's a conversation for another time when this is finished. Sarah accepted this, turning her attention back to the case. We should move forward with surveillance on Senator Harrison. His advocacy for Blackwood's appeals court nomination seems suspiciously enthusiastic. Already arranged, Hayes assured her, and Rodriguez has someone inside Harrison's office. If he's connected to this, we'll find out. As they continued planning their next moves, Sarah felt a growing certainty that they were closing in on their targets. What she didn't know was that Blackwood's network was already moving against them. The first sign that their investigation had been noticed came 3 weeks later. Sarah returned to her apartment after physical therapy to find the door slightly ajar, though showing no signs of forced entry. Drawing the compact 9mm she still carried legally, she approached cautiously, using her wheelchair to mask the sound of her movement. The apartment appeared undisturbed at first glance, but Sarah's trained eye quickly spotted the discrepancies. The desk drawer closed all the way when she always left it slightly open, the couch cushion at a different angle, the barely perceptible scuff marks on the hardwood where someone had searched behind her bookcase. A professional search designed to leave no obvious trace. Sarah moved methodically through the apartment, checking each room, confirming that nothing appeared to be missing. Not her laptop, not the case files she kept in her locked cabinet, not even the cash in her freezer. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. She called Hayes immediately. My apartment's been searched. Clean job, nothing taken. Are you safe? His concern was evident, even through the phone. For now, Sarah replied, already gathering essential items into a go bag. But I need to relocate temporarily. They're telling me they know where I live. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Hayes assured her. Don't touch anything they might have handled. We'll want to check for fingerprints or other evidence. While waiting for Hayes, Sarah methodically checked her various surveillance measures, the nearly invisible thread she placed across her doorway each morning, the precisely positioned items that would indicate if someone had searched specific locations. The intruder had been good but not perfect. They had missed or ignored the micro SD card hidden inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf, a backup of their most crucial evidence. Sarah had just finished securing her weapons when she heard a noise from the hallway outside her apartment, a soft footfall that didn't match Hayes's familiar gait. She silenced her phone, positioned her wheelchair near the kitchen counter to give herself tactical options, and readied her weapon. The door pushed open slowly to reveal a tall man in dark clothing, his face obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. When he saw Sarah waiting, weapon trained on his center mass, he froze. Federal agent, she stated calmly, her aim unwavering. Hands where I can see them. Instead of complying, the man lunged forward with surprising speed. Sarah fired once, but he had already dodged sideways, knocking the gun from her hand with a practiced strike. She immediately compensated for her seated position, using the wheelchair as a weapon, by driving its armrest hard into his solar plexus. The man grunted in pain, but recovered quickly, reaching for a weapon at his waist. Sarah didn't give him the chance. She grabbed his wrist, applying a joint lock that forced him to his knees, then delivered a precise strike to his throat that left him gasping. Despite being seated, Sarah's upper body strength and combat training gave her advantages her attacker hadn't anticipated. She reclaimed her weapon and held it steady as the man struggled for breath. Who sent you? She demanded. The man's eyes, visible now beneath his cap, held a mix of pain and professional assessment. Just following orders, he managed to say, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. Message delivery. From Varga, Sarah pressed, connecting this intruder to Thomas Varga, Blackwood's mysterious foreign associate. The man's slight reaction confirmed her suspicion. The wheelchair woman should mind her own business, he said, his breathing steadying. Some questions get people hurt. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway distracted her momentarily. The intruder used the opportunity to throw a nearby lamp at her, then bolted for the window and fire escape. Sarah fired once more, but missed as he disappeared through the window. Hayes burst through the door seconds later, his own weapon drawn. Sarah, I'm fine, she assured him, though her heart was pounding. Our friends decided to escalate from searching to threatening. He went down the fire escape. Hayes moved to the window, but the man was already gone. Did you recognize him? No, but he works for Varga, Eastern European professional, not a street thug. Sarah holstered her weapon. They know we're investigating them, Daniel. Hayes surveyed the apartment, noting the signs of struggle. We need to get you somewhere safe. My house has a security system and is in a gated community. Sarah nodded, already texting Admiral Hawthorne and Rodriguez to update them on this development. I need to make one stop first. The evidence backup in my bedroom closet behind the ventilation panel. You never told me about that one, Hayes said, surprised. Operational security, Sarah explained. Never keep all your intel in one location or share all your contingencies with any single person. Hayes smiled grimly. Once a special operator, always a special operator. By nightfall, Sarah was settled in Hayes's guest bedroom, which he had already modified months ago to accommodate her wheelchair, a testament to their friendship and partnership. His spacious colonial in McLean, Virginia, offered both security and privacy, with neighbors discreet enough not to question the sudden appearance of a wheelchair-using house guest. Hayes's daughter Amanda joined them for dinner, bringing case files from her work as a county prosecutor. At 32, Amanda shared her father's legal acumen and moral compass, having chosen public service over more lucrative private practice. So you're the famous Commander Morgan, she said as they ate. Dad talks about you all the time. All good things, I hope, Sarah replied, noticing the slight coloring of Hayes's cheeks. Mostly about your case, Amanda clarified with a knowing smile. Though he did mention you are the most stubborn client he's ever had. Not a client, Hayes corrected automatically. A partner. The distinction hung meaningfully in the air between them, acknowledged but not explored further as the conversation turned to their investigation. Amanda proved to be not only aware of their work, but actively supportive, offering insights from her own experience prosecuting corruption cases. The problem with going after judges, she explained, is that even with solid evidence, their colleagues are reluctant to act. There's an unspoken code today. It's Blackwood tomorrow. It could be them. Which is why we need airtight evidence of national security implications, Sarah noted. This can't be just about corruption. It has to be about treason. Speaking of which, Amanda said, retrieving a folder from her briefcase, Dad asked me to look into Blackwood's judicial appointments calendar. I found something interesting. She spread several documents across the dining table. Blackwood is being considered for the First Circuit Court of Appeals. His nomination hearing is scheduled for October. Sarah's eyes narrowed. That would give him even broader access to classified information in national security cases. Exactly, Amanda confirmed. And guess who's the primary advocate for his elevation? Senator Maxwell Harrison, who happens to sit on both the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. Hayes frowned. Harrison has always positioned himself as tough on national security. Why would he support someone with Blackwood's questionable associations? Then that's what we need to find out. Sarah said, her mind already formulating new investigative angles. Harrison could be unwitting or he could be part of the network. Amanda's expression grew serious. There's something else you should know. Harrison and Blackwood have a history that predates the judiciary. They served together on the Senate Legal Counsel in the early 2000s, and Harrison was instrumental in Blackwood's first judicial appointment. A personal connection, Sarah noted. That changes things. We need to investigate Harrison more thoroughly, see if there's any financial link to Meridian or its subsidiaries. After dinner, as Amanda prepared to leave, she pulled Sarah aside. I know what happened to your team, she said quietly. Dad told me everything. I just wanted to say I admire what you're doing, seeking justice instead of revenge. Sarah considered this distinction. Sometimes they're the same thing. Amanda studied her with perceptive eyes. Just be careful that pursuing one doesn't cost you the other. She glanced toward her father, who was clearing dishes in the kitchen. He believes in this case completely, but I worry about him. He's not as young as he thinks he is. I'll watch out for him, Sarah promised, understanding the daughter's concern. He's become important to me. Amanda nodded, satisfied. Good, then we understand each other. After she left, Sarah joined Hayes in his study, where he was already updating their case files with the day's developments. Your daughter is impressive, Sarah commented. She has your moral clarity. Hayes smiled proudly, and her mother's stubbornness. Catherine would have liked you. She had no patience for injustice either. The mention of Hayes's late wife, who had died of cancer 5 years earlier, was rare. Sarah recognized the significance of him sharing this personal connection. Daniel, she said carefully, today's events change things. They're directly targeting me now, which means they see me as a threat. That puts you at risk too. I've been at risk since the day I agreed to help you, he replied simply. I knew what I was signing up for. Did you? Sarah challenged gently. Because it's becoming increasingly clear that we're not just dealing with a corrupt judge and defense contractor. This network has international connections, professional killers, and potentially reaches into the highest levels of government. Hayes met her gaze steadily. All the more reason to continue. Some fights are worth the risk, Sarah. Their eyes held for a long moment mutual respect and something deeper passing between them. Sarah found herself drawn to this man who had stood by her without question, who saw beyond her injuries to the warrior within. In that moment, the possibility of a future beyond her mission became less abstract. Daniel, she said softly, when this is over. Her words were interrupted by the chime of Hayes' secure phone. He checked the message, his expression shifting to one of urgency. It's Miller, he said. He wants to meet tonight. Sarah's focus immediately returned to the mission. Where? The Lincoln Memorial. Midnight. It could be a trap, Sarah cautioned. Or it could be the break we've been waiting for, Hayes countered. Either way, we need to be there. Sarah nodded, her personal reflections set aside for the mission at hand. Then let's prepare. If Miller's really turning, he'll have information that could change everything. As they made preparations for the midnight meeting, Sarah couldn't help but feel they were approaching a critical juncture. The threats against her confirmed they were on the right track, and Miller's sudden willingness to talk suggested the network might be fracturing under pressure. What she didn't know was that their investigation was about to uncover connections far more extensive and more dangerous than they had imagined. The federal courthouse in Boston stood like a fortress of justice against the clear autumn sky. Its neoclassical columns and imposing facade projected permanence and authority, the very qualities Sarah Morgan had once believed in without question. Now, as her wheelchair was pushed up the accessible ramp by Daniel Hayes, she viewed the building with more complicated emotions. Respect for what it represented in principle, determination to expose the corruption festering within. Ready? Hayes asked quietly as they paused at the entrance. Sarah nodded, her posture military straight despite the wheelchair. Operation Kingfisher is a go. The name they had given their mission, Kingfisher, had been Admiral Hawthorne's suggestion. The Kingfisher appears harmless, she had explained, until it strikes with deadly precision. Today was that strike. Inside the courthouse hummed with the ordinary business of justice attorneys conferring in hushed tones, clerks rushing with armloads of documents, citizens waiting anxiously for their cases to be called. Few paid attention to the wheelchair-bound veteran and her attorney as they made their way to courtroom 7. But Sarah noticed the subtle signals that their team was in position. The middle-aged woman reading a newspaper near the water fountain, Assistant Attorney General Carmen Rodriguez, head slightly inclined to acknowledge Sarah's passing. The maintenance worker adjusting a thermostat, an FBI agent ensuring surveillance equipment was functioning properly. The elderly veteran in the gallery, his service cap indicating Desert Storm, one of Admiral Hawthorne's trusted former officers. Sarah felt the weight of Jason's engagement ring against her chest, hidden beneath her conservative blue suit. Today, after 3 years of planning, she would fulfill her promise to her fallen teammates. Courtroom 7 was already half filled when they entered. Sarah positioned her wheelchair in the designated space beside the plaintiff's table, while Hayes arranged their documents with methodical precision. From this vantage point, Sarah could observe the entire room, including the judge's bench, where Richard Blackwood would soon preside. Miller's watching you, Hayes murmured, not looking up from his papers. Sarah casually glanced toward the clerk's desk, where James Miller sat ostensibly reviewing the day's docket. Their eyes met briefly, and Miller gave an almost imperceptible nod. The signal confirmed what Sarah had been hoping for since their midnight meeting at the Lincoln Memorial. 3 weeks ago, Miller was ready. That night had been a turning point. Miller, driven by conscience and concern for his son's future, had provided them with the final pieces they needed: access to Blackwood's private calendar communications, and most importantly, a sealed court filing that had passed through his chambers containing classified information about military operations in Afghanistan, including Delta Six's final mission. My son deserves a father he can be proud of, Miller had told them, in his voice breaking slightly. Not someone who trades his integrity for medical treatment, no matter how desperate I was. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Blackwood. Sarah remained seated, watching intently as Blackwood entered, his black robes flowing behind him with practiced dignity. His eyes swept the courtroom, lingering momentarily on Sarah before settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. First case, Morgan versus Department of Veterans Affairs, Benefits Appeal Hearing. Hayes rose smoothly. "Daniel Hayes for the plaintiff, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morgan, Your Honor." "Miss Winters for the Department of Veterans Affairs," countered the government attorney, a sharp-featured woman who had barely acknowledged Sarah's permission. Blackwood shuffled papers on his bench, appearing to review the case file. "I've familiarized myself with the pleadings. This appears to be a straightforward appeal regarding denial of advanced prosthetics and extended rehabilitation services." "Is that correct, Mr. Hayes?" "In essence, Your Honor, though the circumstances are far from straightforward," Hayes replied. "Lieutenant Commander Morgan's injuries were sustained during a classified operation, the details of which have been redacted from her service record, creating the bureaucratic obstacle to her receiving appropriate care." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, a tell she had learned to recognize during their previous interactions. "Yes, these classified operations always complicate matters," Blackwood commented. "The court is asked to defer to redactions that prevent complete evaluation of claims." "If I may, Your Honor," Sarah spoke up, her voice clear and controlled. "My service record, while redacted, contains sufficient documentation of my injuries and their cause to justify the requested benefits under Statute 38 U.S.C. or shorter 11710. Blackwood's gaze shifted to her, assessing and slightly dismissive. "Commander Morgan, while I appreciate your knowledge of relevant statutes, this court must consider the government's position that your particular circumstances don't meet the threshold for the advanced care you're seeking." The hearing proceeded with Hayes presenting their case methodically, introducing medical evaluations, expert testimony, and precedential cases supporting Sarah's claim. Throughout, Blackwood maintained the appearance of judicial impartiality, but Sarah caught the subtle signs of his growing impatience, the tapping finger, the slight frown when Hayes made particularly effective arguments. When Ms. Winters presented the VA's position, Blackwood's demeanor shifted noticeably, his questions becoming more accommodating, his nods more frequent. To most observers, it would appear as normal courtroom dynamics, but to Sarah's trained eye, it confirmed what they already suspected. Blackwood had predetermined his ruling. As the morning session neared its conclusion, Blackwood addressed Sarah directly. "Commander Morgan, would you care to make a personal statement before we conclude? Sometimes the human element can illuminate these cases beyond the legal arguments." It was the opening Sarah had been waiting for, the moment to begin their true mission. She wheeled herself forward slightly, positioning for maximum eye contact with both Blackwood and the gallery. "Thank you, Your Honor. I would appreciate that opportunity." Sarah took a measured breath, her hands steady on the arms of her wheelchair. 3 years ago, I led a team of elite operators on a mission based on intelligence that we now know was compromised. That mission resulted in the deaths of 3 of my teammates, catastrophic injury to another, and left me as you see me now." She paused, noting Blackwood's suddenly sharper attention. "While I appear before this court seeking medical benefits, what I truly seek is something more fundamental: accountability." Blackwood's expression tightened. "Commander, please confine your statement to the matter at hand, your benefits claim." "With respect, Your Honor, they are inseparable," Sarah continued calmly. "The denial of appropriate care is merely a symptom of a larger system failure, one that begins with compromised intelligence and ends with those responsible escaping consequences." "Miss Morgan," Blackwood's voice hardened, deliberately dropping her rank, "this is not the forum for airing grievances about classified operations or intelligence failures. I thought snipers were supposed to have excellent communication skills," he added with thinly veiled contempt, drawing uncomfortable laughter from some in the gallery. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She adjusted her wheelchair, positioning herself to face Blackwood directly. "Your Honor, may I retrieve something from my bag?" she asked. Blackwood gestured magnanimously. "By all means, Miss Morgan. Perhaps you have actual evidence hidden away." Sarah reached into her bag and produced a small voice recorder which she placed on the table in front of her. Blackwood stiffened. "What is that device?" "A standard voice recorder, Your Honor," Sarah replied evenly. "Permitted under Courthouse Regulation 17B, which allows assisted devices for disabled participants in legal proceedings." "Remove it immediately," Blackwood demanded, color rising in his face. Hayes stood. "Your Honor, my client is well within her rights to use this device to assist her memory given her traumatic brain injury sustained in service. I made no such ruling permitting recording devices in my courtroom." Blackwood insisted, his composure slipping. "With respect, Your Honor," Hayes countered, "the regulation is courthouse-wide and requires no specific judicial approval." As they argued, the courtroom doors opened quietly. A woman in a naval dress uniform entered and took a seat in the back row. Admiral Isabella Hawthorne's presence sent a ripple of whispers through the gallery. Several people recognized the decorated naval intelligence commander whose signature appeared on many of the documents Blackwood had dismissed. Blackwood, flustered by the recorder and unaware of the new arrival, called for a 15-minute recess. As he exited to his chambers, Hayes leaned toward Sarah. "Admiral Hawthorne is here," he whispered. "Right on time," Sarah nodded. "Everything in position. FBI agents are standing by in the hall. DOJ has the package Miller provided." Hayes took a deep breath. 3 years of work comes down to the next 30 minutes. Are you sure about this next step? Once you do this, there's no going back for any of us. Sarah's eyes followed Blackwood's retreating figure. "He gave up his right to mercy the moment he took their money," she said quietly. "The same money that paid for the intelligence failure that cost my team their lives." The courtroom hummed with tension as people waited for proceedings to resume. Several noticed Admiral Hawthorne but pretended not to. Others watched Sarah with new curiosity, sensing that something significant was unfolding beneath the surface of what had appeared to be a routine benefits case. Sarah sat perfectly still, her training evident in her economy of movement. 3 years of planning, of careful documentation, of building networks and gathering evidence, all leading to this moment. She thought of her teammates who hadn't made it home, whose names Blackwood would never know. They deserved justice, and today they would finally receive it. When court reconvened after the 15-minute recess, Blackwood strode to the bench with renewed confidence. Though his eyes darted occasionally to Admiral Hawthorne in the back row, he straightened his robes and cleared his throat. "We will continue with the case of Morgan versus the Department of Veterans Affairs," he announced, avoiding looking directly at Sarah. "The court reminds all parties that unauthorized recording devices are prohibited." "Your Honor," Sarah spoke before Hayes could respond, "I would like to request permission to represent myself for a special motion." Blackwood paused, clearly surprised. "You wish to dismiss your counsel at this juncture? That seems unwise, Miss Morgan." "For this motion only, Your Honor," Sarah clarified. Blackwood exchanged a glance with the court reporter, then shrugged. "By all means, this should be entertaining." He gestured broadly to the center of the courtroom. "The floor is yours." Hayes leaned in close to Sarah. "Remember, stick to the plan. No improvisation." "Roger that," she whispered back, a military acknowledgement. Sarah wheeled herself to the center of the courtroom with practiced precision. The afternoon light from the high windows illuminated her face as she positioned herself to address both the judge and the gallery. The room fell silent, all eyes drawn to her commanding presence despite her seated position. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying easily now, "I move for your immediate recusal from this case based on undisclosed conflicts of interest that materially affect these proceedings." Blackwood's smug expression faltered momentarily. "On what possible grounds?" "On the grounds of demonstrable bias, financial conflicts of interest, and conspiracy against the United States government," Sarah stated calmly, as if reading a weather report rather than leveling explosive accusations. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Blackwood banged his gavel furiously. "Order, order in my court. This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You have no standing to make such allegations." "With respect, Your Honor, I have both standing and evidence," Sarah responded, reaching into a folder that Hayes had placed before her. "Evidence gathered as part of an official counterintelligence operation authorized under Naval Intelligence Directive 1742, signed by Admiral Isabella Hawthorne." All eyes turned briefly to Hawthorne, who remained impassive in her seat, watching the proceedings with hawk-like intensity. "This is contempt of court," Blackwood declared, his face flushing. You cannot fabricate wild accusations against a federal judge without consequences. I agree completely, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice cooling several degrees. Actions have consequences. That's precisely why I'm here today. From her folder, Sarah produced the first document, holding it up for the court to see. These are photographs taken on March 17th of this year at the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, showing Your Honor meeting with Dmitry Volkov, a known Russian intelligence operative, and Victor Chen, CEO of Meridian Defense Systems. She handed copies to the court clerk, who reluctantly passed one to Blackwood. His face paled as he recognized himself in the high-resolution images. A business meeting during a judicial conference is hardly evidence of impropriety, he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. A business meeting that you failed to disclose on mandatory travel reports, Sarah countered. With representatives of a defense contractor currently under federal investigation for selling classified technology to foreign entities, a contractor whose cases have appeared before your bench 7 times in the past 18 months, with rulings favorable to them in each instance. Before Blackwood could respond, Sarah produced another document. These are financial records showing transfers from Meridian subsidiary accounts to offshore holdings controlled by Blackstone Consulting Group, a firm owned by your brother-in-law Roland Blackstone. Each transfer occurred within 10 days of your favorable rulings. The gallery was now completely silent, many spectators leaning forward to catch every word. Several journalists who had been covering the routine docket were now frantically taking notes. Blackwood's knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench. These documents are clearly fabricated. I will have you disbarred for this, he said, glaring at Hayes, who simply stood with arms folded, watching his client work. The documents are authentic, Your Honor. They've been verified by forensic accountants at the Treasury Department and the FBI, Sarah said, placing another exhibit on the clerk's desk. But perhaps most concerning is this. She produced a sealed envelope with the Department of Justice logo clearly visible. This contains a transcripts of phone conversations between yourself and Thomas Varga, a known intermediary for foreign intelligence services interested in American military technology. As she spoke, 4 men in suits entered the courtroom and positioned themselves near the exits. They didn't identify themselves verbally, but their FBI badges were visible on their belts. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably as people realized this was not a stunt or legal maneuver, but something far more serious. In these conversations, Sarah continued relentlessly, you specifically discussed, and I quote, handling the sniper problem and ensuring that the woman in the wheelchair would be dealt with permanently if she continues to investigate. Blackwood's face had now lost all color. This is a setup, he said, his voice barely audible before he seemed to remember his authority. This is my courtroom. I will not be subjected to this kind of ambush. He turned to the bailiff. Remove this woman immediately. The bailiff hesitated, looking between the judge and the FBI agents, who had now moved closer to the bench. Admiral Hawthorne chose this moment to stand. All eyes turned to her as she walked deliberately down the center aisle, her dress uniform, impeccable medals glinting in the afternoon light. Judge Blackwood, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her rank, these materials are part of an ongoing counterintelligence operation authorized at the highest levels. Lieutenant Commander Morgan has been acting as a field operative with full authorization from Naval Intelligence and the Department of Justice. The revelation crystallized for everyone present. This case had never been about VA benefits. The entire proceeding had been an elaborate trap with Blackwood as the target and Sarah as both bait and hunter. That's not possible, Blackwood stammered, looking around wildly as if seeking an escape. She's disabled, for God's sake. My physical limitations became an asset to this operation. Sarah explained, her voice level. You and your associates believed I posed no threat precisely because of my wheelchair. Your prejudice blinded you to the fact that my mind remains my most effective weapon. The lead FBI agent approached the bench. Richard Blackwood, you're under investigation for corruption, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and potential treason against the United States, he announced formally. We have a warrant to search your chambers and private residence. You are not under arrest at this time, but I advise you to contact legal counsel immediately. Blackwood looked wildly around the courtroom that had been his domain of absolute power just minutes before. This is a setup. You cannot do this to me. I'm a federal judge. You're a federal judge who took foreign money to compromise national security, Sarah said, her voice cutting through his protests. You sold out your country and contributed to the deaths of American service members, including 3 of my team. For the first time, personal emotion colored her words. Delta Team 6 didn't die because of mission failure or enemy action. They died because intelligence was compromised, allowing the enemy to prepare for their arrival. Intelligence that passed through your courtroom during the Meridian classified evidence hearings last year. A collective gasp went through the courtroom as the true scope of Blackwood's actions became clear. This wasn't just about corruption or abuse of power. It was about betrayal that had cost American lives. I never meant for anyone to die, Blackwood said weakly, the fight draining from him as 2 FBI agents approached the bench. Few traitors do your honor, Admiral Hawthorne stated, yet they are responsible for the consequences of their actions nonetheless. As the agents escorted Blackwood from the courtroom, the atmosphere transformed completely. Veterans in the gallery stood at attention, recognizing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Others watched in stunned silence, realizing they had observed not just a legal proceeding, but the culmination of a years-long intelligence operation. Hayes approached Sarah, helping her gather the documents. Perfect execution, he said quietly. Mission accomplished, Sarah replied, her voice betraying exhaustion now that the moment of confrontation had passed. Admiral Hawthorne joined them at the table. Outstanding work, Commander. Your team would be proud. Sarah nodded, emotion briefly crossing her face before her training reasserted itself. What happens now? Now we trace the network, Hawthorne said. Blackwood wasn't the mastermind. He was just one compromised official in what we believe is a larger operation targeting our military technology and personnel. In the VA benefits case, Sarah asked with a hint of irony. Officially withdrawn, Hayes said with a smile. Though I suspect the actual benefits will be approved rather quickly after today's events. Hawthorne placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You've earned much more than that, Commander. The President has been briefed on this operation. There will be recognition, though much of it will remain classified. Sarah shook her head slightly. I didn't do this for recognition, Admiral. I did it for justice. The Admiral nodded in understanding. And you've achieved it. Thanks to your work, we have exposed a significant breach in our judicial system. The damage assessment is ongoing, but you've undoubtedly prevented further loss of life. As the courtroom began to clear, many people paused to look at Sarah with new understanding. The woman they had pitied as a disabled veteran fighting bureaucracy was revealed as something else entirely, a warrior who had simply changed battlefields. A young law clerk approached hesitantly. Commander Morgan, I just wanted to say thank you for your service, all of it. Sarah nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing its importance for the operation's public perception. As preparations were made to leave, Hayes revealed something few in the courtroom had realized. Most of them don't even know that you were never the plaintiff in this case. You were always the prosecutor. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she gathered her notes. The best operations are the ones where the target never sees the real objective until it's too late. She glanced at the now empty judge's bench, her expression hardening. Blackwood thought he was judging me. He never realized he was the one standing trial. The corridors of the courthouse buzzed with activity as FBI agents secured Judge Blackwood's chambers. News of what had transpired spread quickly through the building, drawing curious onlookers and reporters who had caught wind that something extraordinary was happening in courtroom 7. Inside, Sarah remained at the table with Hayes and Admiral Hawthorne as they prepared for the formal transfer of evidence to the Department of Justice team that had arrived. The Admiral's presence had transformed the atmosphere, lending official weight to what had appeared to many as an impossible accusation against a sitting federal judge. The team will need your complete deposition, Hawthorne said to Sarah. Every detail of your investigation from the beginning. Sarah nodded. I've maintained comprehensive records. Everything is backed up in 3 separate secure locations with redundancies in case anyone was compromised. Ever the tactician, Hawthorne said with approval. That's why you were perfect for this mission, despite initial concerns about your physical condition. My condition became my greatest asset, Sarah replied. People see the wheelchair and make assumptions. They underestimate. They let their guard down. They speak freely around someone they perceive as broken. Hayes, who had been conferring with the lead FBI agent, returned to the table. They want to do a preliminary interview now while everything is fresh. Are you up for that? Before Sarah could answer, a commotion at the courtroom doors drew their attention. A distinguished man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by two younger attorneys carrying briefcases. His silver hair and commanding presence immediately identified him as someone of importance. Senator Harrison, Admiral Hawthorne acknowledged with a carefully neutral tone, "This is unexpected." Senator Maxwell Harrison, chair of the Armed Services Committee, approached their table with practiced confidence. "Admiral, when I receive word that one of our federal judges is being accused of treason in open court, I take a personal interest." His gaze shifted to Sarah, especially when the accuser is one of our most decorated special operators. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Senator, I wasn't aware the Judiciary Committee had been briefed on this operation." "They haven't," Hawthorne interjected smoothly. "The operation remains classified at Level 4. Harrison smiled thinly. "Which is precisely why I'm concerned about this public spectacle. Matters of national security should be handled through proper channels, not theatrical courtroom ambushes." "With respect, Senator," Sarah replied. "This was the proper channel. Judge Blackwood's position made conventional investigation impossible. Every standard approach was compromised by his connections." Harrison's expression hardened slightly. "Commander Morgan, your service record speaks for itself, but this methodology raises serious questions about oversight and authorization." He turned to Hawthorne. "Admiral, I'll expect a full briefing on this operation within 24 hours. The committee will want to know how a wounded veteran was deployed as bait in what appears to be a vigilante sting operation." "There was nothing vigilante about this operation, Senator," came a new voice from the doorway. Assistant Attorney General Carmen Rodriguez entered, her Justice Department credentials clearly visible. Operation Kingfisher was fully authorized under Joint Directive 1742 with sign-off from both intelligence and justice. The arrival of yet another high-ranking official caused a stir among the remaining spectators. The courtroom had become an impromptu stage for a drama involving the highest levels of government power. Rodriguez approached, nodding respectfully to Hawthorne before addressing the senator. "We've been building this case for 3 years, Senator Harrison. Lieutenant Commander Morgan volunteered for this assignment specifically because of her unique qualifications." "And what qualifications might those be?" Harrison asked skeptically. "Besides being a sympathetic figure in a wheelchair." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees at his callous remark. Sarah's expression remained impassive, but Hayes stiffened beside her. "Perhaps we should discuss my qualifications in detail, Senator," Sarah suggested, her voice carrying just enough edge to make several people shift uncomfortably. "For instance, my 4 years of counterintelligence work before joining the SEALs, or my master's degree in criminal justice, or perhaps my perfect memory, which allowed me to recall specific details from classified documents that Judge Blackwood allowed to be compromised." She wheeled forward slightly. "Or maybe you'd like to discuss my 3 years of dedicated work building this case while recovering from injuries sustained in service to my country, injuries that resulted directly from the intelligence breach that we've now traced back to this courthouse." Harrison had the grace to look momentarily discomforted. "Commander, no one is questioning your dedication or sacrifice." "Aren't you, though?" Sarah asked quietly. "You just implied that my only qualification was being sympathetic due to my disability. I assure you, Senator, sympathy has never been an asset in my career. Competence, however, has." Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "Senator Harrison, I understand your concerns about proper channels. I'm prepared to brief you and the committee fully on this operation, which I personally authorized, but I want to be clear. Lieutenant Commander Morgan's role was not that of bait. She was the primary operative selected for her exceptional qualifications and personal connection to the case." "Personal connection," Harrison repeated, his interest clearly piqued. "The team that was lost due to the compromised intelligence," Rodriguez explained, "was Delta Team 6. Lieutenant Commander Morgan was their sniper and tactical coordinator. She was the only survivor of the ambush that resulted from Judge Blackwood's actions." Understanding dawned on the senator's face. "I remember that incident, Afghanistan 2021. The official report cited intelligence failure, but didn't specify the nature of the breach." "Because we were already investigating," Rodriguez confirmed. We couldn't risk alerting the network that we were on to them. Sarah's voice was steady when she spoke again. 3 years ago, I made a promise to my team as I watched them die that I would find who betrayed us, no matter how high it went or how long it took. She met Harrison's gaze directly. Today, I kept that promise. The senator studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. I see. He seemed to reassess the situation, perhaps recognizing the political danger of appearing to oppose a disabled veteran seeking justice for fallen comrades. The committee will still require a full briefing, but I appreciate the context, Commander. Sarah studied Harrison's face carefully, noting the beads of sweat forming at his temples, the slight tremor in his left hand. His reaction seemed disproportionate to the situation, more nervous than simply concerned about proper procedures. She filed this observation away for later consideration. As Harrison and his aides prepared to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, Commander Morgan, your team would be proud. Not many people have the fortitude to take on a federal judge, much less bring him down. After the senator departed, Rodriguez turned to the small group. We need to move quickly. Blackwood's connections will already be scrambling to cover their tracks. The evidence transfer needs to happen now. While the formal procedures were being organized, Sarah wheeled herself to a quiet corner of the courtroom, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. Hayes followed concerned. You okay, yeah? He asked quietly. That confrontation with Harrison wasn't part of the plan. Sarah nodded. I'm fine, just processing. She glanced around the courtroom that had been the culmination of 3 years of careful work. It doesn't feel quite real yet. It's real, Hayes assured her. Blackwood is finished. The network is exposed. Your team has justice. Not yet, Sarah corrected. Blackwood was just one node in the network. We still don't know how far this goes or who ultimately authorized the intelligence sale that got my team killed. She lowered her voice. Did you notice Harrison's reaction? He was sweating profusely and his left hand was trembling. That's not the behavior of someone merely concerned about proper channels. Hayes's eyes widened slightly. You think he's involved? I think he's afraid, Sarah replied, and people in his position don't fear procedural irregularities. They fear exposure. One battle at a time, Commander, came Admiral Hawthorne's voice as she joined them. Today was a significant victory. The rest will come. The Admiral's phone buzzed. After checking it, she looked up with satisfaction. FBI teams have secured Blackwood's residence in a vacation property in Vermont. Preliminary reports indicate significant evidence, including encrypted communications and financial records not included in our case. He kept records, Hayes asked, surprised. Men like Blackwood always keep insurance, Sarah observed, protection against their associates turning on them. He never expected to be caught, but he would have prepared for betrayal. They've also found something else, Hawthorne added, her voice dropping. Campaign finance documents linking Harrison to several Meridian subsidiaries. Nearly $2 million funneled through various PACs over the last 5 years. Sarah and Hayes exchanged glances. That explains his nervousness, Sarah noted. He's not just Blackwood's political ally, he's part of the network. Rodriguez needs to know immediately, Hayes said. If Harrison is involved, he could alert others before we can move on them. As the formal proceedings continued, the courtroom gradually emptied of spectators. Eventually, only the core team remained, and along with a few Justice Department officials and FBI agents cataloging evidence. What happens now? Sarah asked Admiral Hawthorne as the last of the evidence was being transferred. For the operation, we expand the investigation based on Blackwood's records. For you, the Admiral smiled slightly. That depends on what you want, Commander. Your official status has been recovering while assisting in counterintelligence operations. That status can continue, or we can discuss other options. Sarah considered this. I'm not done, she said finally. Blackwood wasn't the end of this. I want to follow it wherever it leads. Hawthorne nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I thought you might say that. We'll make the arrangements. Later, as they prepared to leave the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered outside. Word had spread about what had transpired, and several veterans had assembled on the courthouse steps, standing at attention. What's this? Sarah asked as Hayes wheeled her toward the exit. Respect, he said simply. News travels fast in the veteran community. As the doors opened and Sarah appeared, the veterans saluted in unison. She returned the salute, instinctively military discipline, ingrained despite years away from active field duty. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. They understood the significance of what she had accomplished. A young reporter broke from the small press contingent that had gathered. Commander Morgan, can you comment on the arrest of Judge Blackwood? Is it true this was part of a counterintelligence operation? Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward. The Justice Department will issue an official statement. This remains an active investigation and we cannot comment further. The reporter persisted, addressing Sarah directly. Commander, why would you risk so much when you'd already given so much for your country? Sarah paused, considering the question carefully. The faces of her team members flashed through her mind, along with countless other service members who depended on the integrity of the systems meant to protect them. The oath doesn't expire with your service, she said simply before continuing toward a waiting government vehicle. As she departed, an older man in a janitor's uniform watched from the courthouse steps. He reached into his pocket, touching what appeared to be a military medal. His expression suggested a profound understanding that there are countless unsung heroes walking among us fighting battles most will never know about. In the car, Hayes reviewed messages on his secure phone. They've already found connections to 3 other federal officials in Blackwood's records. This is bigger than we thought. Sarah gazed out the window at the city passing by. It always was. That's why they tried so hard to silence me. They underestimated you, Hawthorne said from the front seat. A mistake they won't make again. Good, Sarah replied, her voice hardening with resolve. Because neither will I. 2 days later, the news broke. Senator Maxwell Harrison had resigned from the Senate, citing personal reasons. The real story, known only to a few, was that the FBI had discovered extensive financial ties between Harrison and foreign intelligence operations channeled through Meridian Defense subsidiaries. The man who had positioned himself as a defender of national security had been selling it piece by piece for years. Within a week, 3 more federal officials were under investigation, and Meridian Defense Systems had been placed under federal oversight. The network that had seemed so powerful was unraveling rapidly as more evidence emerged from Blackwood's extensive records. For Sarah, however, the most important development came from an unexpected source. James Miller Blackwood's former clerk had provided one final piece of information, a sealed document, showing that Blackwood had personally reviewed and approved the intelligence that had sent Delta 6 into the ambush. He had known exactly what would happen when he allowed that information to be compromised. It was the final confirmation Sarah had sought, proof that her team's deaths were not accidental, but the result of deliberate betrayal. 6 months later, Sarah Morgan stood on her prosthetic legs at Arlington National Cemetery, the cool autumn breeze rustling the leaves around the 3 graves she had come to visit. She placed a single rose on each headstone: Marcus Wilson, Elijah Jones, Jason Campbell, her team, her family. A 4th grave nearby belonged to Rachel Martinez, who had succumbed to her traumatic brain injuries 3 months after Blackwood's exposure. Sarah had been with her at the end, holding her hand as the machines were turned off, whispering that justice had been served. The Washington Post headline that morning had announced, "Former Judge Blackwood sentenced to 30 years for treason." The trial had been swift once the evidence from his Vermont property revealed the full extent of his crimes, not just the selling of military intelligence, but a years-long pattern of compromising national security for financial gain. Senator Maxwell Harrison had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his cooperation, revealing a network of corruption that stretched across multiple government agencies. He would serve 10 years, a reduced sentence that still represented accountability few had thought possible for someone of his position. 3 other federal officials had been indicted, and investigations continued into Meridian's extensive network. The company itself had been dissolved, its assets seized, its executives facing charges ranging from fraud to espionage. Sarah touched Jason's headstone, remembering the promise she had made 3 years ago as she lay bleeding in the Afghan mountains. She had kept that promise, though the cost had been high. Commander Morgan. She turned to see Daniel Hayes approaching along the cemetery path, distinguished in his dark suit, his silver hair catching the autumn sunlight. The ceremony's about to begin, he reminded her gently. Sarah nodded, taking one last look at her teammates' graves before walking steadily on her prosthetics to join him. Together, they made their way to the White House, where later that afternoon, in a ceremony closed to the press for security reasons, Sarah Morgan would receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for her actions in exposing the network that had threatened national security. The citation would mention her extraordinary heroism and dedication to duty, but would contain no details of Operation Kingfisher. Those would remain classified, known only to a select few who understood the true magnitude of what she had accomplished. After the ceremony, Sarah and Daniel returned to his home in McLean, now their shared home. As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah finally removed the chain from around her neck, the one bearing Jason's engagement ring. "I'm going to visit Emily tomorrow," she said, referring to Jason's fiancée. "It's time she had this." Daniel nodded in understanding, closing one chapter to begin another. Sarah looked at him. This man who had stood beside her through the darkest days of her life, who had believed in her mission when others saw only a broken soldier. Somewhere along the way, their partnership had evolved into something deeper, something neither had expected, but both now cherished. "I never thought I'd have this again," she admitted quietly. "A future, a purpose beyond vengeance." "Justice, not vengeance," Daniel corrected gently. "There's a difference." "There is now," Sarah agreed. Inside the house, she could hear the voices of Daniel's daughter Amanda and her children who had come for dinner, a family that had somehow become her own. Later that evening, as Amanda's son asked about her military service, Sarah found herself sharing not the classified details of Operation Kingfisher, but the deeper lessons she had learned. "The most important thing to remember," she told the boy, "is that justice sometimes comes slowly, but it always comes if there are people willing to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." The child looked at her with solemn eyes. "Is that why you kept fighting even after you got hurt?" Sarah glanced at Daniel, who watched them with quiet pride. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly why." As the night deepened and the family gathering wound down, Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the stars visible through the trees. She thought of her team, Marcus, Elijah, Jason, Rachel, and felt for the first time in years that they could truly rest in peace. She touched the empty space at her throat where Jason's ring had hung for so long. Tomorrow she would fulfill her final promise to him, and then perhaps she could begin to live again, not just for the dead, but for herself and for the future that stretched before her. "True heroes don't just fight in war," she whispered to herself, echoing what her father had taught her long ago. "They fight every day for what's right, no matter the martyrdom." As Sarah turned from the window to join Daniel and his family, she knew that while one mission had ended, another was just beginning. The system that had allowed Blackwood and his associates to operate still needed reform. There would be more battles to fight, more justice to secure. But for tonight, in this moment, Sarah Morgan, warrior survivor, justice keeper, allowed herself to simply be a woman coming home at last.